a permanent government job. The cream is the civil servant. Permanent job, job security, and also a misplaced sense of I will have power. I'm firmly of the opinion if you follow rules and do your job as you're meant to do, you will never have power. There are industries being churned out for these competitive exams. To me, that's the death of learning. You make children feel inferior, you harden them. तुम क्या कर लोगे? 5 साल तो कुछ नहीं कर पाए. How are you ever going to get over it?
Right.
I'm a most unlikely civil servant. I'm an accidental civil servant. Okay. So we all assume growing up that standing first was mediocre. You didn't need to stand.
Sharma ji ka beta was not a concern.
Oh, not at all. Just the reverse. We look quite pityingly at Sharma ji ka beta कि इसको क्या मजा होगा जिंदगी में. पढ़ के तो यहाँ आया.
In this episode of Conversations Cafe Podcast, we had a guest who has been a civil servant for most of her life. We spoke about the craze of UPSC. We spoke about how she became an accidental civil servant. If you are a civil servant aspirant or you want to bring a change in this particular country, this podcast is definitely for you. We spoke to Ratna Viswanathan. Do watch this podcast till the very end. If you can't watch longer podcasts, there is a Conversations Clips channel. Subscribe to that and find smaller videos of this particular podcast there. If you like Conversations Cafe Podcast, do subscribe to this channel, hit the like button and share this video with as many people as possible. The podcast with Ratna Viswanathan starts in 3, 2, 1. Alright, we have Ratna in front of us, as I mentioned in my introduction. Ratna, thank you very much for joining us in for Conversations Cafe Podcast Season 2. This season is my favorite because back to back I'm interviewing women who have made change possible. Wow. And this is something that I really wanted to do because that lacked in the Season 1. And thank you once again for actually joining us in today. And starting with your early career, early journey, right? What was that like for you while you were growing up? Where exactly things started for you when you look back?
Well, when I was growing up, I lived all over the place. I mean, I belonged to Orissa, but I went to school in South India. And then I lived in Orissa, that is Bhubaneswar, then Lucknow, Calcutta. And then, of course, after I got into service, I've been all over the country and abroad as part of the postings that we do. Like I keep saying, I'm an accidental civil servant. Okay. Because, I finished my post-graduation at Lucknow University and hanging loose end.
What were you studying?
I did English literature and I did it because it was a passion with no aim in sight that, I want to be a lecturer or I want to do a PhD, nothing. I love literature and I said, why not, right? So I did an MA in English literature and then a group of my friends were actually signing up to take the prelims. So they said, why don't you? And I'm like, I don't know the first thing about it, I'm not interested. They said, chalo yaar, maze ke liye karte hain. So I failed. And then of course and Lucknow had no access to all the sophisticated classes and structured training. 5 of us, we would sit, cut competition success review, which you never read, by the way, and make pothas out of it.
What year are we talking about?
This was in which year did I get it? In 1986.
Okay.
For us in Lucknow, it was like, chalo, exam dete hain. Good idea. And I had no clue that, there's so much stuff happening because you didn't have social media.
Right.
So you didn't know that there was so much stuff happening in the ecosystem. And I'm sure if we knew, we'd get really threatened. But sometimes ignorance is great bliss. And since we didn't know, so the 5 of us got together. And we tried, we'd buy these books from those terrible guides and which had MCQs and mug and say, okay, you ask me. And I made it through the prelims. So I said, now that I've made it, then why not give it a good shot? Right. And that's how this happened. And strangely enough, I actually got, as per my rank, into the police, but I think my family and entire extended family felt that temperamentally I would be like a complete misfit because I can't yell, I can't hit, I can't, do all the brave things people
So
do.
you'll be the sweetest police person.
Not sweetest, I'd be the most ineffective, I think, because I'd feel so much sympathy when someone started crying, irrespective of whether, it's a criminal or not. You engage with people. And I have a thing that when you look into people's eyes, it tells you stories irrespective of where they're coming from.
Yeah.
Right. So I am like, no, too much empathy, bad space to be. So then finally, and also talkative and outspoken and constantly expressing opinion, thanks to my growing up years. So then the larger family kind of debated and said, you know what, audit and accounts is a good place because firstly, it has a constitutional head as head of the whole space. She will never be in direct connection with anything like political because she talks too much. So great space to be. And I loved it, to be really honest. It's a great service, very good colleagues, big learning space. And I think all the work that I do now is in so many ways informed by my exposure to the service because, exposure to government gives you a ringside view of the largest space, right? That's one. Two, because you're constantly managing people. And people who you can neither fire nor incentivize, right? So you have to learn how to get them to work because you have to work with who you have.
Even if they're not the most effective people.
Doesn't matter. That's all you have. So you have to get the best out of them. And I realized that if you got to know what worked for that person, they would work.
Correct.
Right. So you had to get to know the person, what made the person tick, and they would definitely perform. And I've worked with some people who have been told, oh, ye to bilkul kaam nahi karta, sabse useless hai. And you realize actually the guy is not useless, wants validation. And since not being validated is not performing. You see, so one word of encouragement, some praise, and the man's working. So I think these are the things I learned in government, and I'm quite sure any kind of formal training in managing people will never give you the depth that you have when you're actually engaging with large bunches that you have to work with irrespective. So for me, government was a brilliant training ground, and I'm not that person who trashes the government because I think it's a space where you learn a lot. It's got the best institutional memory system that anyone can have, which predates all your computers and other things. Those files which people make fun of, people keep changing all the time, right? Has all the memory. I mean, has all systems in place, rock solid systems in place. So to trash all of that, when I came out of the sector, I'm like, wow, I was so used to these really comfortable frameworks in the background, which I didn't really appreciate. You realize, oh, I'm at sea. There is no system here. Now I have to think of a system. So it worked well. The learning was brilliant. I don't ever trash government because, I feel that it is the largest public facing body.
Right.
Which is why everybody thinks they have the wherewithal to take a pot shot. But I'm sure every other sector must be having similar problems. It's just that they're not visible.
Including your small microcosm of a particular corporate office.
Absolutely. But they're not visible.
Yeah.
They're not open to RTI. They're not open to anything. So nobody knows, right? But this you see. So you presume, oh, I know this system and it doesn't work. If it didn't work, we wouldn't be where we were today.
Wow. Lovely. 2-3 things that stood out with the response that you gave me. One was you said that you were not that political and probably that's why you chose IAAS. Second thing was it was an accident that you became a civil servant. Let me combine these two. When this was happening, what was the reaction of your family? How supportive were they of you becoming a civil servant in the first place? And do you think that support is still there right now when people actually like in flocks try to get into civil services?
It's strange. My father's side of the family actually had a lot of civil servants. In fact, my grandfather, his father was a part of the Imperial Civil Services. And a lot of his brothers were in different civil services. My father himself was for a short while at TAS. Though I have to tell you this, I think my father was a very defining presence in all our lives actually, because he was that father who didn't stress on, you have to stand first.
Yeah.
He was like, burn when you need to burn. Don't burn before that. Have fun. we're 5 sisters and a brother, and we never realized there was something like, gender difference, any kind of discrimination. All grew up together. My dad, had this thing that we were the best, and we also felt we were the best, right?
Right.
And they were extremely supportive parents. And I remember my father, when we were growing up, if somebody said, that one's daughter stood first in the 3rd standard, and he's like, how mediocre. So we all assume growing up that standing first was mediocre. You didn't need to stand first.
Sharma ji ka beta was not a concern.
Oh, not at all. Just the reverse. We look quite pityingly at Sharma ji ka beta कि इसको क्या मजा होगा जिंदगी में, पढ़ के तो यहाँ आया, तो और क्या करता है ये? Because we used to have a ball all the time. And I think all of those factors help in creating a happy person.
Yeah.
Right? And you never dwelling on, if something goes wrong, you're never dwelling on, oh my God, what am I going to do? You're dwelling, okay, this has happened. How do I move on?
Yeah.
And that's what you got from your parents. Right? And I think we grew up extremely happily, and they were supportive of anything I wanted to do. Can you believe it? I wanted to do textile design, if you
wow.
please.
You're and great looking at your sense of style, but yeah.
I really wanted to do textile design, and like I said, I meandered into this without realizing where it was going. Nobody forced me ever to say, why don't you take the civil services? So the good part was that I just felt they're feeling happy. It doesn't mean anything. I don't have any other choices in my head right now. It's okay. Let me get it. And I have no regrets. And they've been, they're not there any longer. But I think our parents were super supportive. I'll tell you a little story. So my sister, she failed in Hindi. And in her school, if you failed in Hindi, you didn't get promoted to the next class. So he came back and he saw her with a long face and said, oh, you failed in Hindi. Never mind, we'll do this. Let's go see a Hindi film. Your Hindi will get better. That happened. Then he went to school and he told the teacher, how has my daughter failed? You have failed because she's not a Hindi speaking person. If she has failed in Hindi, you have failed in your job. And the girl got promoted. So that was his approach, and I think we all grew up that way. So it's been good, happy growing up, and very supportive.
Sadly, nobody did that to me because I failed in Sanskrit at grade 8, and that remained with me because that's the only subject I failed in my life. And I never got better in Sanskrit, probably because I didn't have great teachers, and that's probably why it's so important to have this, whether it's your parents or your teacher who understand that, if a student fails, it's not the student's fault.
Absolutely.
It's the system's fault.
Not only a system's fault, I think there are also a lot of other nuances, like there are things happening at home, for instance. And if a child is deeply unhappy at home for whatever reason, or is stressed, might be a very bright child, but is not absorbing what is being taught because there are things in the head that are happening. And who is really looking at that child to understand that otherwise this child performs well, this is deviant behavior. Do I need to ask this child what is wrong? I think that also helps, because being aware of the children around you is quite critical. It's not about technology all the time. It's also about empathy. And I think in education, what is critical is empathy.
Correct.
Because if you build from a space of empathy, you rarely go wrong.
I feel personally this bit of empathy is missing whenever we put students into competitive exams. I think it's very harsh, it's very unfair, and a lot of students feel rejection for the first time when they're part of these exams. Talking about UPSC, we all know the numbers. How the funnel works, how difficult it is to become one, and people waste years after years, chasing that. How do you see that craze even today?
I think we have this mindset of a permanent government job, and it's at all levels. And in the pecking order, the cream is the civil servant, right? So that then becomes an aspiration, because you are permanent job security, and also a misplaced sense of I will have power. I'm firmly of the opinion, if you follow rules and do your job as you're meant to do, you will never have power. It is only when you start, dispensing that rule which otherwise needs to be just rolled out, that's when power actually comes in.
Very powerful.
Right? It's like a mirage. Permanent job, I will have power, so to speak. I will decide things, and that drives people. And I think it's the security and the permanency, apart from whatever else it offers, which is a large part of the chase. Because once you're in what is called the system, it's the steel framework that runs the country, the governance, the systems, the structure, and you want to be a part of it, and that is the pull. And obviously it is very harsh, just like in any other competitive exam, where slots are limited, but the aspirants are many.
Yeah.
And so automatically it will be harsh. You see, it's not the system that is harsh. I think it is the design of trying to get access to limited seats by a huge bunch of people automatically creates the competition, automatically creates bad spaces where people then, I think also the other thing that really works, and you're saying UPSC, I think it stems back to our education system.
Correct.
Where you're always compared to the other person. So you're striving to beat the other person rather than focusing on yourself and saying, I need to excel. If I've done this time, I need to do this much better next time. No, I'm more worried about what did he do? How did he do it? Let me ask him. I need to do this better than him.
Right.
So that also creates its own stresses and strains. So I think it's the nature of the beast. Competitive exams by definition and by design will drive this behavior, will definitely have rejection patterns. It happens at school.
Correct.
Right? If there are kids who are doing very well, the teacher tends to be nice and promote those kids and can be quite harsh with those who are not performing, whereas some of them need to be handled better, because I've seen a lot of poor performers in regular schools who go out of the system and shine and flower and become brilliant because they have the space.
Yeah.
Right? And I think critically what is missing is validation. You don't have to do the best to be validated.
Right.
If you've done 3 things out of 10 things well, you still need to be validated. And all of this then leads into this whole attitude of competition, attitude of rejection, and feeling dejected because you haven't been able to, achieve something. And sometimes I feel, okay, I haven't achieved it. I may have had a bad day. Because sometimes the best child who gets 100% all the time gets 60 because he's not feeling well. And it's one exam, and that is my problem, that one exam that defines the life of a person or a child, that one exam, that to me is a problem, because you can have a bad day.
Absolutely. And we are in one such space where, we talk to a lot of aspirants, people who have taken this particular exam. They get into B schools. Again, the competition is very fierce there. A lot of them tell that, I have had a stellar mark record, but on that day I could not perform. And that defined who I am as a student. And that's sad, because then that person has to wait another year to write that particular exam and get into it. And, I have met a lot of these individuals who have been trying to do that with the UPSC examination, and then they thought that maybe it's taking a lot of toll on us and a lot of time from our growing up years. So it's better that we shift our focus. How do you see that shift when they make that decision that now I'm not going to pursue this further because I understood that it's a chase that probably I will not win, or I don't want to be part of? They deciding to do something else. Do you see that positively?
Of course I see it positively. You can be brilliant and you will not make the cut. But it's also extremely addictive, because you're always like, okay, it didn't happen this time, maybe next time, next time, so
restart.
So then you kind of get stuck saying, yeah, I did this so well so far, I need to just up this game a little bit and maybe do it next time. And you look at somebody else you think is mentally not as bright as you are, and that person's made it. So like, if he's made it, why can't I make it again? That whole competition syndrome. And there are only a very few people who smartly decide, you know what, this is a mug's game. I've given it a shot. Now it isn't happening. Let me do something different. There are industries being churned out for these competitive exams, not just civil services, of all sorts. To me, that's the death of learning, and that is also where you make children feel inferior, you harden them, they start undervaluing themselves. I mean, it's a wretched space if you ask me.
Wow, that's very powerful. Related to this is something that I wanted to ask you, and there's a new film. I don't know whether you have watched 12 Fail or not.
Oh, I loved it. My
so
God.
again, there are two sides of it. One side of it says that you need to get up and you need to chase your dream, irrespective of whatever you are going through, and you have to restart. But a lot of these people who are restarting probably will never reach there, right? Even after 4th, 5th attempt, and then they have lost 5 years of their life, and then they are clueless as to what to do next, right? How do we then take a call? When do you take that call? How do you understand that probably this is not ideal for me to restart?
I just think that it depends on the individual more than anything else, because it's up to the individual to take that call that, I've tried thrice, I may have another 2 attempts, but there's a trend to this, and something I'm doing that isn't right. I've gone to all the training classes, I've taken all the coaching, I've taken the whole world's, versions of different responses to what I need to be answering during the exams, and I'm still not making it, right? It means either I'm not cut out for this, or there's something that I can't really place my finger on it. So it's best I step back while I can still cut my losses. And I haven't crossed, because here in India, employment is something that people look for. And also employers look at youngsters who've come in, 5 saal kuch nahi kiya isne.
Right.
What were you doing for 5 years? So we start tending to judge when you hit the employment market. Or alternatively, then people start looking at exploring other ways of entering the job market. So there are other less fiercely competitive exams. For instance, you have the subordinate service exams. You have a lot of non-competitive technical focused exams. They start exploring other options. There are others who step completely away and say, you know what, I'm out of this. Maybe I want to teach, or maybe I want to draw, or maybe I want to go up into the hills and do something different. Today, what really, really excites me is youngsters today are not bound and tied down by, oh, this is good and this is what I want to do. The way their minds are open, they are the true purveyors of the gig economy in its best sense, right? You have children who are like, I'm freelancing, not because I can't get a job, but I prefer freelancing because it gives me more creative space. It allows me to think and strategize, whereas if I'm in an agency, I'm working till 4 in the morning, where's strategy, right? And it gives me the freedom that if I want to sit in Goa and work for 4 days, I can do that. I'm not bound by the tyranny of apply for leave, nobody's giving you leave, you're being guilted for leave. And I see these kids, they drop pretty what I would consider good jobs and get into this, I'm freelancing space, and me, civil servant, and naukri hona chahiye. I'm like, wow, I love you guys. But I think it's a very different way of approaching things.
Right.
So yes, there will still be that segment, and also a large part of it is driven by where you come from, your parents, your extended family, your surroundings, that will still definitely keep aspiring for the civil services. But having said that, I think children today are also looking out beyond. I mean, we put out a national education policy that focuses on holistic learning. There's a need to intrinsically understand what holistic learning means. Not just by the system, but also by parents.
Correct.
Because a lot of times you keep blaming teachers, you keep blaming the government. It's the manic parent at the other end who's like, mere bacche ko 100% kyun nahi mila?
Correct.
Right. So I think everything balances. There will always be people who will want to be civil servants. There will always be people who will, get completely battered and shattered by the system. And it's very difficult to pick up those pieces, because apart from you, your immediate surrounding doesn't forgive you either. They don't stop reminding you. If you have a parent who's like, तुम क्या कर लोगे 5 साल तो कुछ नहीं कर पाए, how are you ever going to get over it?
Right.
And how are you ever going to start valuing yourself and wanting to do something? If you have your extended family, your so-called support system, who should have been there to buoy you up, saying nalayak hai, kuch nahi karta. So it's a very nuanced and complicated space, and there's no single answer to any of this.
Correct. You mentioned about the Gen Z and its choice of working from anywhere. Freelancing is on the rise. We all have seen that. But let me, Ratna, bring you to an ILO report that was recently published, and I was going through it, and some of the numbers seem scary. Don't you think? I mean, 80%, 83% of your youth workforce not being able to find jobs. It's just scary.
It is. And more so because you see, today we are one of the youngest demographies in the world. The average age of India today is between 28 to 30 years of age, which means we've hit a sweet spot.
Correct.
In terms of having the largest possible employable workforce. Now, it's up to us how we leverage the sweet spot, right? And it's not all about employment only. I think this whole focus on skilling, for instance, and I think one needs to do the skilling in a way that makes youngsters employable or makes them entrepreneurial. Because when you start enterprise, you become a job creator rather than a job seeker. About 4 years of my work was with microfinance, and first hand one had the wherewithal to look at women in enterprise. Very small enterprise, micro enterprise, but women in enterprise, and women who had very low literacy and numeracy, right? So obviously we need to make those decisions. There is between the standards of 8 to 10, maximum number of children do a school to work transition between grades 8 and 10, right? There is a certain amount of vocational education that happens as part of syllabus. But I think there's a need to stand back and see vocational education as a smattering of understanding the space as opposed to actual skilling. That's one. Two, I think skilling needs to be extremely focused on which geography am I wanting to live in, right? In another agency where I had worked, we had this experience where with the help of a hospitality enterprise, we trained young people a way of handling people at hotels, at small shops, establishments, all of that. And a large part of that population got lifted from wherever they were and we sent off to Bombay, right? So that they would be employed. In a year and a half, almost 90% of them were back because they were miserable.
Correct.
They were in a new place. They couldn't sustain themselves. The whole idea was to earn to sustain family. They couldn't do that either. And so they came back, which was such a waste of all the time, energy, effort that had gone in training, placement, employing them, all of that. So even skilling, etc., I feel it has to be nuanced and has to be completely in context with, I live here. If I'm open to moving, then train me in a different way.
Correct.
If I want to continue to live in this geography, then scope this geography and see what can I do. Like hospitality is a big place. It's not everybody doesn't go into 5-star hotels. You get into shops, you get into small establishments, but you're at home, you're comfortable, a smaller sum of money, you're earning and you're able to support family and yet be comfortable and in a good space. We don't put enough emphasis on mental health because it's not just about teaching children, skilling children, making them employable. I know we're a big country, but there's no harm in trying to find out what the person wants to do. What does he or she want to do? If you're investing so much in, creating infrastructure, creating systems, frameworks, etc., how about engaging at a point to find out what do you really want to do? And this doesn't have to be only with high-end schools. You have counseling, you have children who are exposed to speakers from different professions. You have children going and doing internships with big agencies to decide what they want to do. This doesn't happen in the so-called private budget schools or government schools. And 62% of children in this country go to government schools, right? 15% go to the high-end schools, and in between is that little black hole called the budget private school, right? So when you are able to concentrate on 15%, it doesn't take much. What will it take for you to include certain elements of this in the way you access children daily? You do it within classroom hours. Nobody is asking you to do anything outside. It's nothing different. It's no extra pressure on teachers. But, systematically ensuring that children are engaged with, I think is a good place to be. Because even things like, employment, occupation, etc. Because I have nothing else to do, I might end up being a mechanic, and there's nothing wrong in being a mechanic, but that's not what I want to be. That's not my passion, right? Now, if I want to do something different, I want to play music. It may not give me money immediately, it might give me money a little later. Do I have the wherewithal? Or am I so pushed by my circumstances that I need to start earning the money and I have to do it fast because I have so many people to support?
Yeah.
So it's a very, it's a tightrope. It needs to be balanced. Whereas, yes, it is important for children from, let us say, low income households to be able to start earning. Somewhere along the way, there should be a segue where they also have somebody, even if I can't get there, listen to my aspirations at least. Right? So, the entire system, for me, there is never any standalone. Civil service, education, etc. It's, I think, just moving blocks, and they need to be all triangulated at the back end to actually create a person that works.
Ratna, do you think the present government is kind of harping on the idea that you don't need government jobs and there are other avenues of getting into the whole employment scene?
Look, I don't know whether the government is saying this or not, to be honest. A lot of times it's inference. A statement, if a statement is made, people tend to infer things and interpret things depending on which lens they're looking at it from. But I don't think that's a wrong assumption, because there is a lot more beyond government jobs, and if you really want to strengthen the fabric of the country, and today the young population is open to it. I know a lot of children who do not want government jobs. If you see, the aspiration for government jobs comes from traditionally thinking households who still think that it's the only secure job, right? So it is encouraged at that level कि ये तो secure है, जिंदगी भर आप secure रहोगे, and it comes from that mindset. Now, for children who have the appetite to take risk and to think differently, they don't want a government job necessarily. But again, that also brings us to another nuance in terms of access. If you've had a lot of access, you have the choice to decide, I want a government job or I don't want a government job. But if you come from a situation where you know that you want a permanent job to look after your family, to give them a better life, etc., then your focus is the government job. I don't think there are any definitives that you can ever arrive at, because these are conversations that are extremely nuanced and very contextual to the person you're talking about.
Any other country that you have seen which kind of gives the same importance the way we do as Indians to government jobs?
I think it's this, our neighboring countries. It's ours. It's
the South Asian countries.
South Asian countries. But beyond that, I don't think I've seen this.
Right. And there's a sense of,
I mean, people like civil service jobs. They are important jobs. But then there's a lot of lateral entry as well. People from different sectors also become civil servants. There's a lot of fluidity there depending on the need and the ask. Unlike us, where it's a structured, kind of entry into the service. Everybody, I think, is proud of their civil servants. But it's not necessarily the only option.
21 years of being a civil servant, and definitely we're going to spend some time on what you did as a civil servant. First, I want to know, if you don't mind, share your rank with us. And with that rank, you said that you had an IPS option. What other options were there, and what were you thinking back then? So
I could have opted for any of the central services, frankly, because the IPS, so it's the IFS, the IS, and the IPS, right? And once you have any of these, you can choose any of the central services that you're looking for, which income tax, customs and central, like anything at all. And of course, like I told you, a great deal of thought went into why I should go into audited accounts, and I have never regretted it, because it's a small, very well managed service, extremely respectful, extremely, it allows you the space to function. I can't comment on other services, but this I know that within the audit system, it's a very, very democratic and approachable, workable service.
And wasn't there a lot of numbers in finance all of a sudden
I have to tell you this joke, okay? I used to hate maths. So after the 10th standard, I happily burnt my maths book. Like, I will never ever look at numbers again. And the guy up there like, yeah, the joke's on you. Because then the next thing I knew, I was doing audit, but it's different. Financial systems is different from doing mathematics.
Yeah.
Right? And it's more systemic. It's about looking at things in broad spectrum, etc. So yes, the numbers are there, but they're not maths, they're not calculus, they're not algebra, which my nightmare is to be calculus and algebra. My God.
Same here, you found a companion.
And I'm like, where am I ever going to use this? Main to engineer banna nahi hai. But it's okay. I mean, you go through all of it. But yeah, I mean, in retrospect, if you look at it, the numbers weren't bad. And understanding numbers gave me something really important, and that is wherever and whatever you do, and when you approach something, look at it through a lens of risk. So your first analysis is a risk analysis, right? And I have found that it has stood me in good stead wherever I have gone. So
Interesting.
Yeah, it was useful.
Can you dwell a little on that? I mean, how did you do risk assessment when you actually became part of the government? You were working with a lot of projects.
No, not when I was part of the government. Like when I quit the government.
Okay.
Because audit is all about looking at systems.
Yeah.
What worked, what didn't work, making an analysis of why something didn't work, where the money spent for the purposes they were meant to be spent.
Right.
Was there a better way it could have been done? Are there gaps in the system? What are the risks in the system that will allow for leakage of revenues or leakage of budget? So you're constantly calibrating, and that's great learning, but it also sets you on to thinking wherever you come to that, what is the risk in this setup? And my first would be, and what are the mitigating steps that you would need to put in place in comparison with the risks we've just identified.
Ratna, you must be a fearful person for a lot of departments, no? Because they would think that Ratna aa jayegi and then she will do her audit. And
Ratna kuch nahi karti. I'm very well behaved. No, I have no fear, but I think it's about self-discipline. Self-discipline and the hygiene of working in a particular way, not threatening anybody. And that helps. Like, I think it also helps when you are at a leadership level or at a senior level, because it also kind of gives comfort to the people you work with. Like, you know what, she's not scattered, she's not all over the place. And it's like children, badmashi kyun karte hain? They're hoping that somebody will say stop now, and so you're like, okay, this is my boundary, I'm secure. Right? Even in a workspace that works. If you're somebody who's like, oh, you said this, yeah, I agree with you. He said that, yeah, I agree with you. And people are like, where is she coming from? What does she really want? Creates insecurity, creates fear of some sort. Like, does she even know what she's doing? So I think having that clarity of thought has been very helpful, especially when you're working at a systems level, you're trying to put in place frameworks and things. It
Let's talk about stories. You worked with a lot of state governments during your time. Anything that you particularly remember that you were working on as part of an IAS? You were doing this, you probably were traveling a lot, you were working in different states. Something that stays with you that you did which was very challenging, or something that, really put you to test?
I think every situation puts you to test, because you're working with state governments, but you're working under a central steer, right? So the central steer then drives a lot of the work that is done at the state. But in any case,
which was the CAG, right?
The CAG. So in any case, there is already a method to the madness. So when you plan an audit or you plan to look at a department, you already have a framework in place, checklists in place, and you also have parties, audit parties that go and do the work at the ground level. I think the biggest challenge is managing audit parties because you know your vision also has to translate at ground level, and there are a lot of things that happen that sometimes irritate the people you are auditing, and you have to manage those relationships. You have to make sure that your team is doing what they should be doing and not going beyond their brief to do things that are out of the remit of what they should be doing. All of this works, and you have to constantly, I think what makes a good auditor is you have to stand in the shoe of the auditee. The easiest thing in the world is standing on moral high ground.
Yeah.
Like I'm the last honest man standing and baki dunya chor hai. Okay, it doesn't work. There are a lot of executive decisions that people take which in hindsight seems they could have done this better. They could have used that method. Hindsight always brings wisdom. But what was the executive, and of course there have been lots of instances of violation, etc., and they pop up out of the system. They're clear violations.
I'm going to put you on spot. Can you name one or two?
I wouldn't be able to do that. I think there are enough audit reports in public domain which will tell you what happened where without me even wanting to name anyone or anything.
Right.
Not my gig.
Yeah, continue please.
Yeah, so basically, so when you're working, you need to be able to stand in the shoe of the auditee and understand what prompted this executive decision at that point in time, and having, like I said, the empathy to understand that rather than saying galat hai at the first instance. And I think that differentiates a sensible auditor as opposed to somebody who says, I'm the last honest man standing or woman standing.
Any particular individual in the government, whether it was in the government services or people from the state that made you feel that this person is actually thinking about making a change?
A lot of people. And you'll be surprised, people keep saying government mein kaam nahi hota. Aisa nahi hai. There's a large number of people, very honest, very ethical, extremely hardworking. And you see, system has its constraints because there are hierarchies. But within those hierarchies, like within my own domain of work that I'm doing, if I want to make a change, I can do that change. And you will see it at every level. It's not necessarily restricted to any one individual. It's like some individuals are visible. You know a 12th pass, so you know this person. There must be so many other stories like that which you don't know, right? So it's not necessarily that only those who are visible are the ones who have made that change. There are others, the foot soldiers who are working at lower levels who are also making the change. So there isn't that any one defining person, and it happens at every level.
Right. Was it lucrative as a career when you actually joined it? Were you seeing you being at par with your friends?
Not at all. The last thing on my head was money. Okay, the last thing on my head was money. Do you know what I did with my first salary? I bought a life-size teddy bear.
Oh wow.
Okay, because I'm like, I'm earning money, right? It was, and we were such a useless bunch of, people, probationers. In my batch, I think almost 80% of us, it was our first job. Straight college se aa gaye the.
Freshers.
So whereas about 20% had worked before, they were smart and sensible and all, saying, chal, let's go. Aaj kya khayenge? And that was the only thought on your mind ki paise mile, chal, let's go eat something. Crazy mindset. So I don't think money and, I'm getting this job and I'm planning and I'm going to do this with my money. Not at all. And my first posting was home. I was at home for 6 months before I, got married to a batchmate and went to another posting. And I would come home with my salary and give it to my mother because I had no idea what to do with it. And I would get a princely sum of 500 rupees pocket money, right, to go and do it. And I'd be so happy, I have 500 bucks, man. I don't think it ever even occurred to me. It just happened actually organically firstly. So it was not like, I'll get money, I'll be at par with others, etc. No. And I don't think money's ever been a driver for me, ever.
Did you meet your husband in Labasna? If that is not very personal.
We met at Shimla, which is where the Audit and Accounts Academy is. Yeah, we batchmates.
Okay.
And
So Labasna is for IAS, IPS,
It is basically, there's a foundation course for 3 months where the Foreign Service, the IAS, the police, audit and accounts, and a couple of other services, Forest Service, we all come together and do a foundation for 3 months.
Got it.
Some services have their own, like income tax has it in Nagpur, railways has it in Baroda. So there's a bunch of services that come here and do a foundation course for 3 months. After that, all services go away to their own academies. It's only the IAS that remains because that is their premier academy.
Understood. So you worked with a lot of departments as well during your time. And one such department that probably is very close to is the education department. I don't know whether it harps back to what you have done back then in the education department, but something that you're doing right now today in the education department.
I didn't really work. That's the joke. When I got headhunted for this role, right? And I told the board that was interviewing me, I said, listen, my only thing that I have done in education is I went to school. I haven't done anything else. Are you sure I'm the guy you want? And they said, no, we want a systems person, which probably it worked well. Sometimes it's good to stand back from what you're doing and it gives you a broad vision of things. We used to, of course, do a lot of work with education in terms of audit because you audited all the schemes of the government. So whether it was Operation Blackboard or any of these, there are a lot of very, very good reports.
Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan, did you?
Sorry? Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan. All of that. We've actually from CAG, we've done a lot of audit of different, education schemes, etc. So that was my access to understanding education in terms of a systems framework. But I was never on the side of looking at it from how do I better it. I was not engaged with the art and the science of education and how it pans out with children, right? I was on the other end looking at frameworks and reviewing them, saying, is this efficient? Have they reached target? If they haven't, why have they not? Have they followed procurement processes? Very different lens, right? I think the only department I did do a secondment with two actually. One was defense and the other was Prasar Bharati for a very short while. But my broad vision of things at large as far as the government is concerned is audit, because you audit every department of the government. So whether it's railways, whether it's the telecom, whether it's defense, whether it's all the civil departments of central and state governments, you audit all of it. So it gives you a really good ringside view of the way government functions, government schemes, the way schemes get rolled out, implementation, all of that at a very, very, broad ringside view.
During your time, probably when these institutes of eminence came into being, the course fee was not as high as we are looking at right now, right? And that's definitely something that you would have looked into while you were auditing these education institutes. And that was the time when IITs were booming, that was the time when IIMs were booming and new IIMs were coming up. It's a two-part question. One is, why is higher education getting so costly every year? And do you think enough is being done by the government with respect to the money it spends every year, which is the part of the GDP that it spends on education?
Look, there are two things here. I think one of the reasons why higher education is becoming more expensive is probably because there are certain costs, including infrastructure costs. Having said that, I sometimes feel that the increase in fees is not commensurate to the growth of infrastructure, is not commensurate to the kind of, in terms of quality that children are learning, whether it's the IITs or the IIMs. At some point it militates in my head as to why the fees are going up. What is the reason? I, for instance, take a student loan at 14%, 15%. The cost of education is going up at about 2 or 3%. So obviously my student loan, the debt service I'm doing is much higher than what actually the cost in terms of creating infrastructure, etc. is going up. So I think there's a dichotomy there somewhere, but I wouldn't really want to comment on this beyond a point, because there are certain decisions that are taken, and these are not decisions taken by entities or individuals. There are collegiate bodies that sit, discuss, and in their wisdom decide on doing, raising fees, creating different infrastructure, and now, for instance, we're building so many more these centers of excellence to make it more accessible to a larger number of children. I think if I'm not privy, I can of course comment on it from an outsider's perspective. But having been a part of government at some point, there are a lot of things that happen inside, a lot of thinking that goes in, into the process, where as a bystander, as an outsider, you may not be privy to. So you can't really make an informed comment on something like that.
Okay. I was expecting a little more if you can delve into it, because it bothers me to see the government spendings on education being so low. I mean, healthcare and education is something that previous governments have also not put in a lot of effort to kind of revive in a big way.
I think right from the beginning, if you've seen, education spending has always been about 2.53%. So it's not this government or previous government.
I'm not criticizing this particular government.
Or any other government. It's been around that percentage. But that's education at a broad level. But then now you have like specific spends on different focused aspects as well, rather than the broader spectrum of education. There needs to be a little more thought that goes into allocation, because I feel that sometimes there are duplication of things that have happened in the past without consolidation of what has already been happening. Okay. Right? So that for me is a bit problematic, because I feel monies can be spent more efficiently if these spaces are identified. But having said that, at the end of the day, education is a concurrent subject. So the recommendation and steer comes from the central government, but the actual implementation, the budgets, the provisioning, everything happens at the state level. So to just say that at a broad spectrum level, it is 3%, 2.5%, 3%. But states from within their budgets can also make allocations. They don't have to stick to the universal 3% or 4%. They can at their level decide what they want to do. So you have states that spend substantial amounts on education and others who don't. So it's a complicated space. So I can't really say that, government should give more. What about state government? They maybe need to step up as well. And since they decide, it again, like I said, a lot of this is personality driven.
Right. Since you work with a lot of state governments, do you see that willingness to spend more on education in any of the state governments beyond the states that you probably work with also, which has
there are a lot of states that are aspirational in so many ways, like the northeastern states. They really want education to work for them, right? Some of the smaller states want education to work for them. There are some of the larger states that are doing pretty well, whether it's a Haryana, but these are more urban states. So they have far better infrastructure, much more access to things like internet connectivity, electricity, all of that. So they tend to do better because there is a ecosystem that is supporting the process. Having said that, there are also, it also depends from secretary to secretary to secretary. So some people focus much more, for instance, on bettering the system, bringing in quality, etc. But in India, we have a revolving door policy, right? I'm a secretary for 3 years. I go, somebody else comes. Now, unless that person decides to take forward what I have done in the past, or decides to reinvent the wheel and say, you know what, I can do this better, let me change it.
Right.
Okay. That also leads to leakages and inefficiencies in the system. You see, it's not only focused on budget.
Correct. Okay. So you mentioned that you worked intensively in the Ministry of Defence, and I know for a fact that a lot of information can't be divulged when we talk about Ministry of Defence. And specifically, your tenure is interesting because there was a shift in government and power that happened, right? As a civil servant, does it affect you or the way you work if the governments change in a big way?
Look, you're working at a functional level, right? You handle a desk. A desk performs a particular function. Change in government and policy doesn't affect your desk. Right? I did 3 things. I did procurement for the Navy. I did infrastructure with border roads, and I did ops and intelligence with the army. Right? Specific desks, specific dispensations, specific work. The larger policy doesn't affect your desk. Yes, if you are the Secretary Defence, you may know what is happening. At my level, not really. It's functional, it's business as usual, you just do your work. You certain things that you need to do, you have certain things that you have to put up, you have things that you need to analyze, and you just go on doing the same. So at that level, the functional level, there isn't really much that you feel in terms of change. Yeah.
But did you see, so were you part?
But I can tell you something. For instance, we've had defense secretaries who've been extremely quick. You know, things that have been lying for ages that need to be taken up to the Cabinet Committee on Security, for instance, for approval, and have been lying for whatever reason. There are some secretaries who are really smart, dynamic, quick, and who will take it through and push it through. Whereas there will be others who will be more cautious. And I won't say that they're not working, they're more cautious because there are large sums of money involved, there are large number of lives involved, so they may be more cautious.
Right. And probably you were at a time when India was spending heavily on, yeah, we still are. I mean, the most amount of money that in our GDP goes into, protecting the country, and probably that's true for a lot of other countries as well. Help me understand. You said that you were someone who is at the desk monitoring certain things that happens. Does that change when a country goes through, say, a war, or a very tense situation that you are handling at the borders, or something which is an unrest within your own country, as a civil war that happens?
No. So there are two things. There's external aggression and there is internal strife. They're two very different things. What happens internally is the job of the police. What happens externally is the job of the armed forces. Right? The armed forces, just like in any other country, are trained in a particular manner and have a lens with which they approach things, which is very different from the police or civil defense. So the armed forces' entire focus is on security, safety and security of the country.
Right.
And it's not just this country, it's every country.
Everywhere.
And the way we are designed is in relation to the threat perception from hostile countries and support from friendly countries, and our entire approach, whether it's terms of spending, whether it's in terms of policy, and very closely linked to diplomacy as well, right? And these are things that actually drive the security parameters and the diplomatic policy of a country. So it's very broad, large scale and very different. So if there's internal strife, it's internal strife. That's a law and order issue. That has nothing to do with safety, security at the larger level, at an external aggressor level. They're very different and handled by very different agencies, unless there are situations when it gets out of control, and then there is something called aid to civil authority, where the DM or the concerned competent authority invites the army in to help put peace back in place or help settle something, or even like for instance during floods, right? The army is called in because they help with evacuation, medevacs, all kind of things they help with. They called in because it's where other systems are not able to buoy it up and support it, then the army comes in. But otherwise, typically, their job is not within the country.
One such situation probably would be the tsunamis when it hit
we did a
India.
lot of work around the tsunamis. I think we supported, I was with Border Roads at that time, and we supported Sri Lanka, etc. by providing, bridges and all kinds of things. You have to do it. And so the army comes in when there's, it has a particular regimentation. So if you tell them that you have to reach that spot, they're not going to call up and say, हम क्या करेंगे, सड़क टूटा हुआ है. They've been trained in such a way that they will find an alternate route to go and reach that point. And I think that's what really works, especially in times of crisis, bringing in the army.
Is long hour a thing for civil servants? Like they spend a lot of hours in office when things like this
To be honest, we call ourselves 24 hours available.
Okay.
Honestly, it depends on what is happening at a point. There are periods of lull when you're at peace, you can go wherever, and there are times when something has to be submitted, there's a deadline, there's a target, because everything has an impact and effect on lives of people, right? So you can't sit and say मैं तो छुट्टी जा रही हूँ. No, if it has to be done, it has to be done. So just like any other job, there are periods of lull and there are periods of very high activity.
What all states have you traveled during this stint? And there's probably...
You mean posted it?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Okay, so
Orissa,
traveled and posted
traveled
are
all
completely
over
different.
the place. Traveled all over the
Yeah.
place. I mean, I love this country and I like going to places, and as you've seen, I love talking. So it's a great fun. But we, like in terms of postings, yeah, I started with Orissa, then Tamil Nadu, then MP, then Himachal, then went abroad to London for a short stint, then Karnataka, then Delhi, and I've been here ever since. I
Superb.
quit from here.
Which was the favorite one?
I liked all of them. I mean, we've had brilliant experiences, different places. Himachal anyway is where the heart is because our academy is also there. So, you feel like you're back home because you've trained there. The chaps who we call them boys, room boys, they're actually 70 and 80 claiming to be 40. Lovely people. Oh my God. We have probably best probation ever. But so Himachal was a bit like home, and going back really felt good. But I think I've enjoyed every state we've been posted in. A place like Gwalior, I mean, I remember people telling us it's a tough posting, people are not easy. Oh my God, we had 240 people who came to see us off at the railway station when we left. So it all depends on how you interact and engage with people. And I feel if you respect people, that's what everyone is looking for, respect. And if you respect people, you win people over. So yeah.
Great. Did you complete your service, Ratna, or you wanted a voluntary
I took
retirement?
a voluntary retirement because my batchmates are just retiring. So
You're ahead of them.
Yeah, I think so. Like I'm one of those who want to, go with my boots on. I'm not about to give up so easily. And so I quit after I finished 21 years voluntarily. I quit.
Great. Any I mean, if it's personal, you can choose not to talk about it, but any reason why you thought that, now you've done your time and now you want to do something else?
Yeah, a lot of civil servants constantly flirt with the idea of doing development work. Like, yeah, ye nahi karna, let's join the development sector. For me, that just like anybody else, constant flirting with the thought development sector. And it was just, I think, coincidence or fortuitous that I was finishing 21 years, because when you finish 20 years, you're eligible for a pension, right? And I got approached by a headhunter for a quite senior position in a very reputable not-for-profit. So it kind of circumstantially, it was not planned. It was coincidental, it was organic, and the time was right. Right? So I'm like, why not?
Help our audience understand what's happening in the microfinance space in India a little bit. Help me also understand, because I have very little knowledge about it.
Okay, so the microfinance space is basically defined in terms of household income. So if you are at a particular level of household income in rural India and in urban India, you're eligible for a microfinance loan.
Correct.
Right? And it's a very small ticket size. Like if my household income, I don't remember what it is now, it used to be, but if my household income in rural India is about, let us say, 1 lakh or 1.5 lakhs, and in urban India 2 lakhs a year, I'm eligible for a microfinance loan.
Yeah.
The microfinance ticket sizes are typically small. It can go up to 1 lakh, starts at about 40. Nobody straight away gives 1 lakh, because you graduate your customers up the business and then give them more loans. There are two things happening here which I think a lot of people don't appreciate or understand. Almost 99% borrowers are women, right? So whereas, some of the women, of course, may give it to their husbands or whoever is the actual business person in the house, there are a lot of women who are doing their own business.
Yeah.
They start their own businesses, they do computer training, they do beauty parlor work, they do tailoring, they run flower shops, they run just outside their houses, little kirana shops, they're doing stuff, right? And so when I go into conversations where, you have a lot of people who say, oh, we need senior business women to mentor our young, entrepreneurs who are coming onto the scene. And I tell them, do you know that there are 4.2 crore women in this country who are not lettered, who have very little numeracy, running their own businesses, right? Because what microfinance has done is given them access to finance.
Yeah.
right?
True.
And there's a lot of criticism around the microfinance sector, the very high rates of interest, etc. There's a need to understand that we pay much more interest on our credit card bills, right? These women have never had access to finance. You're providing them access to finance. To somebody with a low base to pay back, they don't really care. So it's you and I with our understanding of rates of interest, with the very high rates of interest. You know, for them, the fact that they now have access to unsecured loans is a big deal.
Okay.
And each and every woman that gets a loan is, registered on the credit bureau. They have credit histories, right? And what happens typically is, and if you've seen the the microfinance sector, the NPAs traditionally have all been below 1%.
Wow.
Which means that these women value that money and pay back.
Correct.
Right? So, and the fact is they're unlettered, but they intuitively pick up numeracy. They are very good with understanding क्या मेरा लोन साइज है, मुझे कितना वापस करना है, एक महीने में करना है, एक हफ्ते में करना है, and they pay back because they want to take the next loan, right? If I have had no access to credit, I obviously value credit. And the other point I was trying to make is, people talk about very high interest rates. The fact remains that the rate of borrowing is quite high. For a typical microfinance organization, if you're really big, you might get it at 12%. But if you're a smaller one, you will even get it as high as 20%. And I don't know whether things have changed now, but I remember when I was there, it was either whatever is your rate of borrowing plus 10% or 26%, whichever was lower.
Okay.
Right? And then out of that, the actual profit, because after all your OPEX and everything, because it's a very people intensive business, it's a feet on street model, you know, and it's a door to door model, and the connect with the end customer is extremely high touch. Right? Because a lot of them are unlettered, so they want to understand, they want to engage, they're happy if you come to a particular place for them to make it convenient for them to come and pay back. They're unlettered, they're completely uncomfortable going into a formal bank setup, right?
Yeah.
So the feet on street model, it's a very high touch model, and so the costs are high. So your OPEX, for instance, is very high. So your actual profit that you're likely to make is about 1%, and really high is about 1.5%. So, you know, to stand back and say very high rates of, you have to understand the business model first, right? And in the past, of course, there was a kind of ceiling on the kind of interests that could be levied. But today, I think the Reserve Bank has made up, a level playing field.
Right.
But what happens with the level playing field is not that everybody goes back and starts charging very high rates of interest. It all disrupts and bounces into a plausible, doable rate of interest, because you want your customers to pay you back, right?
Right. And that ecosystem is flourishing in India, in your opinion?
Absolutely. It is, I think, it services that segment of the population where banks can't lend because they are unsecured loans.
Right.
And also the fuzzy segment, like the MSME segment, when they start, like if you need a loan up to, let us say, about 5 lakhs. So because typically banks don't want to engage in very high transaction burden, and also fuzzy collateral. So not an easy space. But now you also have the small finance banks whose mandate is to engage with the marginalized sectors, and 75% of their lending has to be those sectors. So yes.
Any quick turnaround story from that space that you can think of, where people who actually needed that help got that help and they made a living for themselves?
Oh, plenty. I mean, I'm talking about 4.2 crore women.
Correct.
Any woman you go to, it's surprising. I went to Dharavi, right? And I went into households where women had been borrowing.
Right.
And I was thinking, these are conservative people. Would they have done it themselves, or would they have given it to their husband? You will be surprised at the number of women who are doing their own business. So this very interesting lady, I said, so do you enjoy doing it? Thoroughly, I enjoy doing this. I said, do you give any money to your husband? Why should I? He runs an auto, that's his business,
Right.
This is my business. I think what it gave women a lot of times women don't have a place at the table. The moment you bring in some money, and I have no evidence to this, it's more anecdotal experience, they do get a voice. They do get a voice.
Right.
You know, because there is money that is being brought. Right.
I absolutely agree with you on that point because I've seen that in my personal life. Ratna, you mentioned that you wanted to get into development sector, and probably that's why you took a VRS as well. When did Reach to Teach come to your mind? When did you actually conceive this idea that this needs to happen in India? Because we spoke extensively about school education, we spoke extensively about what is the need of the hour for these very students who are, impressionable minds, who can be created into individuals who are part of this economy, right? When did you actually start thinking about it?
Well, the Reach to Teach began in India in 2007. You know, there was a expatriate Indian whose parents had migrated from Gujarat, who then, that whole spirit of giving back to society started a very small operation of reaching out of school children in Valsad, which is one of the tribal districts of Gujarat. To bring out of school children into school. So it started as a very, niche, boutique kind of approach where 2 buses actually went out to try and get these children into the learning net, and they actually carried food to attract children to come and learn. So that's where it began. From there it has gone into several iterations till 2019. Reach to Teach remained in Gujarat, but moved up from this model to working with schools, bringing out of school children into schools, working with government school establishments at the district or the panchayat level to work with teachers to strengthen teaching outcomes and teaching structures within classrooms. We basically worked in 3 districts, Morbi, Kutch and Bharuch, right? When COVID happened in 2019, there was a bit of a pivot, and they said now we've worked on the ground for almost 12 years. So all this learning needs to go somewhere.
Right.
So then, there was a pivot and they signed an MOU with the government of Gujarat in 2019 to start a relationship to work at the education department level. So I joined in 2020 and in the heart of COVID, if I may say so. And that was when we did a really good amount of work because we were working with the government and we actually worked with them to create content, to create books which needed to be sent out to children. We worked within the communities in the 3 districts. We were working to facilitate children learning in the heart of COVID and very, very good learning. Then I just thought, so being a government servant, you're an ashant atma, okay? And you're like, I can't be working in one state. I need to do other stuff as well. So then Haryana happened and you see now the National Education Policy 2020 mandates accreditation as something mandatory to all states, and they wanted an accreditation framework. So it just happened that we had a certain amount of expertise in Gujarat thanks to we are a UK charity. So at some point all the Ofsted and all the other exposure, all of that learning had helped us do things in Gujarat, although Gujarat has a very strong system already in place called the Gunotsav. And so when Haryana asked us, we said okay, but we'll design it from scratch. Because when you have the hindsight advantage of learning from an existing system, then you want to pick out what really works and then put it together into a reconstructed system. So then we built a accreditation framework from scratch for Haryana. And it was rolled out in December last year. The Chief Minister, Mr. Khattar, and the Education Minister, Mr. Dharmendra Pradhan, actually launched it as part of a larger launch of PM Shri schools and other things. And now it's being socialized across the state and seems to be working. Of course, it will go through several iterations and I'm sure it will. For some time, it had been in my head that the northeastern states actually, in terms of education, forever seem to be around the not the periphery, at the bottom of the pile in terms of national indices, education indices, whether it was the NAS, whether it was the PGI, and we wanted to understand why this was so, because when you engage with people, you engage with the governments, you engage with the education departments there, they are very forward thinking. They're very, I think, sold on the idea of bettering education in the state. The challenges, I think, stem from the fact that a lot of agencies don't go into those areas for various reasons, including accessibility, low density populations over very large areas, communication accessibility in terms of road infrastructure being a challenge, intermittent electricity and connectivity. There are a lot of challenges. And we said, you know what, children need to learn irrespective of challenges. And it really makes sense to go and engage, because if you're looking at creating quality education systems, why only focus on those areas where it is already in progress? Why not where, you know, there is something happening but maybe not enough? And that's how we then moved into first Arunachal, signed a tripartite agreement with Niti Aayog and the government of Arunachal. And the kind of, you know, flexibility, they really embrace you as a partner. You have to, of course, build that space. It doesn't come easy. You have to earn trust, because, and one thing you realize, because you've been a government servant yourself, is you have to work with the government. It's not about going and advertising in public space कि मैंने ये कर दिया, मैंने वो कर दिया. It doesn't work. If you're serious about what you want to do, you just put your head down, become a part of the government, work with them as a partner to build, because every government has a vision, right? And one of the things we've done both in Arunachal and Meghalaya is completely, you know, focused on local culture, local context, local understanding, and extensive consultations, not just with the department, but with teachers who are the user group.
Correct.
Because only if there is ownership at some level will they actually roll this out and use it. If there's no ownership and I go and saying, you know, I'm this dude with this great design and this is how you need to do it, they're like, really?
Ratna, one last question. What are you looking forward to in life?
You really want to know? Okay. Cliched, but we've gotten to this place because we really want to move the needle in education in government schools. And believe me, I'm happy to do this for the next 15 years or till I drop dead, whichever is earlier. Because we feel, you know, it's in small pockets, it's very easy to create excellence.
Correct.
When you're doing it at scale, if your needle moves even 1%, multiply it by the numbers.
Yeah.
It's a massive thing.
Correct.
And that's what we're trying to do. And we're also doing deep dive in the states that we work in. So I don't know how many states we would actually go to unless we can prove the thesis in the ones that, the hypothesis in the places that we're already working. Looking forward to maybe a couple more states, if at all, but definitely working this model, calibrating, recalibrating to make it as efficient as it can get.
One last message to the clueless students watching this video.
I don't think students are clueless. You know, we tend to talk down to children without realizing they are little adults, they are individuals. They have their own understanding and perception. You know, children's personalities actually evolve between the ages of 3 to 7. Everything else they learn afterwards. So I would never call them clueless. Yes, there is always a space where they may have less access, less opportunities. And I think they should think things through in terms of what you really want to do.
Right.
Because, and have the wherewithal to do it as well. Because once you decide this is what I really want to do, it doesn't become a job any longer. Right? You look forward to doing what you want to do.
Okay.
And I hope our education system at some point, because if we actually go by the philosophy of the National Education Policy 2020, it envisages this, that children learn in a manner that, you know, helps them do what they want to do. Unfortunately, it is going to take a very long time because we live in a system where marks matter, where competition matters, and don't blame the system because parents are equally guilty of pushing this.
Correct. Thank you very much, Ratna, for taking out time from your schedule to do this with us. I really enjoyed talking to you because of, the one thing that you said in the beginning, that, there is no heavy hand that can actually make someone learn. So probably that's the approach that I have when I interview people. I like people who are, who don't speak from a pedestal, who come on the ground and talk to someone who is here to understand and learn something. And that's something that I felt today in this conversation. I don't know how you liked it.
Oh, I loved the conversation. It was free flowing, it was easy, and I didn't really feel I was meeting you for the first time. It was a great conversation, so thank
Lovely.
you.
I hope that you guys liked this conversation as well. If you did, do share it with your friends. This time around in Conversations Cafe Podcast, we have a variety of guests from different backgrounds, and that's what we are trying to do. We're trying to break the status quo. We're trying to make you understand that there is just no one path to success or careers, and that's why we are bringing these individuals. Do tell us in the comments below which are some of the other guests that you would want us to bring here, and do tell us what do you think is the solution for the education problem in India. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much.